Om Vishnu Braya Krishna Prasad Bhutale, Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamane, Namaste Saraswati Deve, Gauravani Vacharane, Nirvishesha Shinivadi Paskatyade Siddhane. Today I'm going to read from the Nectar of Instruction. Text number, this is text number 6. Drishtai Swabhava Janitera Vapushas Doshara, the Prakritatvam Iha Bhakta Janasya Pashat, Gangamba Samna Kalu Bud Buddha Pena Pankara, Brahmadravatvam Abhigachiti Niradharamai.
Maharaj, I'm so sorry to interrupt. There is something black above your camera. Could you please remove this? Thank you. Yes, that's that.
My light.
Thanks.
Believe it or not, my light makes it black. You see, if I put the light down, it becomes black. If I put the light up, it becomes bright. This is, I imagine, Lavanga Latamanaji, that you have the translation of purport in Russian.
Yes, I have everything ready. Thank you.
Okay. Being situated in his original Krishna conscious position, a pure devotee does not identify with the body. Such a devotee should not be seen from a materialistic point of view. Indeed, one should overlook a devotee as having a body born in a low family, a body with a bad complexion, a deformed body, or a diseased or infirm body. According to ordinary vision, such imperfections may seem prominent in the body of a pure devotee. But despite such seeming defects, the body of a pure devotee cannot be polluted. It is exactly like the waters of the Ganges, that sometimes during the rainy season are full of bubbles, foam, and mud. The Ganges waters do not become polluted. Those who are advanced in spiritual understanding will bathe in the Ganges without considering the condition of the water. Purport: Shuddha Bhakti, the activity of the soul proper, in other words, engagement in the transcendent loving service of the Lord, is performed in a liberated condition. In the Bhagavad Gita 14.26, it is stated, Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate, sagunan samatityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service does not fall down in any circumstance, and who does not fall down in any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature, and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Here, the process of liberation is explained. Liberation means liberation from our material conception of life. Just like, for instance, a coconut. If you have a coconut, if you get one in Mayapur, you shake it, you can't hear anything if it's not ripe. But when it's ripe, the coconut looks exactly the same as it did before, but the inner part falls out, the hard part where you have the milk. And then when you shake the coconut, you can hear the inner part shaking because it's detached from the outer part. So in the same way, we, the small soul within this body, by our consciousness, we're now absorbed in this material conception, in this material body. Material conception means that I'm experiencing subtly from the intelligence, I have a pretty good conception, and grossly my consciousness is pervading the body to a certain extent. And when the body feels good, I feel good. When the body feels bad, I feel bad. And therefore, my consciousness has become more or less identified with the gross and subtle body. According to Bhagavad Gita, actually, none of us have anything to do with our bodies, in the sense that we're all transcendental. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Anadidvat nirgunadvat paramatmayam avyam sharira stopi kontiya nakaroti namulipite. That those who can see with the eyes of eternity can see that the soul is eternal, transcendental, and beyond the modes of material nature. Despite contact with the material body or Arjuna, the soul is neither entangled nor is he doing anything. Prahladananda, would you like me to tell you the verse numbers so you can look them up? Is that
If you
necessary?
could, it would help. But if you can't, it's okay. I will translate on the fly. Okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Maharaj. I don't want to interrupt the flow. Whatever works.
Well, it's always nice to. I think your translation might be better than the one in the book. So maybe it's good not to tell you what the verse is. So we're all transcendental. We may not feel very transcendental, but we can experience that although all of us have our good days and our bad days and our really bad days, actually, we're not affected by these things. Our experience is certainly affected by it. We don't look forward to bad days, just as we're not necessarily always expecting good days. But in any case, we go through one after another. So the soul is not changing in spite of its experience in the material world. That shows that we're transcendental, although our consciousness is not, and our conception of life may not be. Krishna consciousness is to change both of those, change our conception and change our experience. We change our conception beginning with hearing. First of all, we have to hear that we're not this body, and because it's a reality, therefore, with the intelligence supplied by Krishna, we can perceive it. We may not experience it fully, but we can have some understanding of it. And with that understanding, we become progressed towards seeing the world differently. And as far as experience goes, that's mainly obtained by becoming detached from our material conceptions and therefore deriving the opportunity or the ability to concentrate our minds upon Krishna. We can either concentrate our minds upon Krishna or we become distracted by material thoughts. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, apuryamanam achala pratishtam samudram apa pravishanti yadvat tadvat kamayam pravishanti sarve seshantim apnoti nakama kami. That's 270 in Bhagavad Gita. A person is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into an ocean, which is always being filled, but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. In other words, I believe all of us have the experience that thoughts are flowing through our minds all the time. Some of them may be in goodness, some of them may be in passion, and some of them may be in ignorance. And therefore, our mood, our experience is constantly changing. On the other hand, there's a possibility of having a reservoir of knowledge within our heart, of transcendental experience. And therefore, when we're thinking about Krishna, For instance, we may read, I was just reading about Jad Bharat. Jad Bharat was formerly known as Bharat Maharaj. Bharat Maharaj was the emperor of the entire world, not just this little place we call the earth, but he was the emperor of at least Jambudweep, a vast amount of land, much bigger than what we conceive this earth to be. And he lived for a long time. But when he was a young man, maybe 25,000 years old, young at that time, he retired to the forest to seek perfection. And living a very simple life, a very regulated sadhana, he was able to constantly think about Krishna. And therefore he reached the stage of Bhava Bhakti, where tears would come from his eyes when he was worshiping his deity. His body would shiver in ecstasy, thinking of Krishna and his pastimes. In other words, there's a television within our heart, and there are different channels. There are many channels dedicated to Maya that we've watched repeatedly. And there's also a transcendental channel that we can turn on to. It's called Srimad Bhagavatam channel, Krishna book channel, Bhagavad Gita channel. So we have different channels also we can turn on to. And as our heart becomes purified, not only we turn on to the channel and we hear something from Bhagavad Gita or we hear something from Krishna book, but we actually start remembering or visualizing. Not only visualizing what we're hearing, but also experiencing. Smelling the flowers that Krishna has in his hair, hearing the sound of Krishna's flute, touching, feeling Krishna touching the flowers of the deer. Because these channels are all spiritual and transcendental. And when they're perceived within our heart, we have the ability to utilize all the senses and experience what's going on in these pastimes. And the more our heart becomes purified, the more our experience increases by turning onto these channels. So Bharat Maharaj was completely turned on to the channel. Well, not completely, because Bhava Bhakti, although it's ecstatic, is only one ray in the sunlight of prema. Just to give some idea, when we first approach bhakti, the science of bhakti, shraddha, there's some slight inclination towards to hearing about Krishna, or to tasting Krishna prasadam, or to hear the holy name. It gives us some relief and some satisfaction. Therefore, we seek the association of people who have more experience than we do, and we learn from them the science of Krishna consciousness. That's called sadhu sangha. Now in Shraddha and sadhu sangha, we're fully absorbed in material life, in material consciousness, but we have a little space in our heart for Krishna. And therefore we like to come and hear about Krishna, see the deity, take some prasadam, associate with the devotees. Then we learn from the devotees there's a process called bhajana kriya. Kriya means practice, where we can practice worshiping Krishna. And so we start chanting rounds, japa. We may start getting up early in the morning or earlier in the morning. We hear Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita regularly, or other transcendental literatures. And we try to change our consciousness. And that's outlined in the Madhurya Kandambini, how some of our material conceptions and attachments gradually diminish as we become more expert at Bhajana Kriya. It goes through a process called Utsahamayi, where we believe we're much more advanced than we actually are. And we're feeling some greater enthusiasm than we had before, but we don't really have enough experience to understand what our enthusiasm is relative to the absolute reality. So we become a little proud, thinking ourselves greatly advanced. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the analogy that a schoolboy, he's just studying practically the alphabet, but he thinks he's a learned scholar already. Then it goes through something called Ganatarala. We're flying in the air, thinking we're in Vaikuntha. The next moment, we think we're visiting Yamaraj, wondering how we got there. So alternating thick and thin. Then there's Vishaya Sangara, Yura Vikalpa, where we're trying to give up our attachments to the material world, sometimes unsuccessfully. And sometimes we're trying to renounce the material world, somewhat unsuccessfully. But anything we practice, anything we are sincerely trying to do, then after some time, we do become more successful. And therefore, there's a sense of freedom from every time there's a thought for material sense gratification, we're not overwhelmed by it. And every time there's some idea of detachment, we don't become oblivious to everything else, thinking ourselves to be a Buddhist yogi. So we have nothing to do with the material world. Then one comes to this platform of Niyamakshama, where one tries to become steady in devotional service. One understands that if I could always chant Hare Krishna, if I was always thinking about Krishna, I'd actually be happy. But in spite of all our plans to get up at the same time every day, chant extra rounds, read so much every day, we become distracted by one thing or another. And Maya says, see, you're not as great as you thought you were. So we struggle. And then after some time, we actually become a little steady. And everyone's in awe. Krishna, how is this person getting up at the same time every day? Must be mystically empowered. That's Taranga Rangini. And then we think, yeah, I'm mystically empowered. I'm God's gift to the Hare Krishna movement. By my mercy, the movement goes on. And that's just called Anishnita Bhajana Kriya. And then there's Nishta, steady devotional service, which is what's explained here, liberation, where one's channels, when you turn on to channel Hare Krishna in the form of the Bhagavad Gita, it becomes alive. It's not just reading some verses, but it's actually, you look around and you see the verses a lot, that they're alive. When one reads Srimad Bhagavatam, one goes back to the past time in ancient history, and one is actually living there with the great devotees, experiencing their ecstasy and their realizations in Krishna consciousness. So that's the stage of Nishta, steady devotional service. And then, obviously, if you eat an ice cream cone, you like the flavor, strawberry, because we don't eat chocolate, or vanilla, or maybe sometimes we do eat chocolate, I don't know. Then we like the flavor so much that no one has to tell us, would you like another ice cream cone? Because it's so nice. Similarly, if our heart becomes purified enough and we learn the technique, or not learn, but we realize the technique, experiencing Krishna through hearing about him, then no one has to encourage us to hear about Krishna. Just like no one has to encourage a fish if you'd like some water. If you have a fish outside of water and you ask him, we'd like a glass of water, he'll jump into your glass of water. You don't have to encourage him. So one has tasted Krishna consciousness, the happiness that no one has to encourage one to chant Hare Krishna or to read Prabhupada's books. One is naturally inclined because it is relishable. So that's called ruchi. But after some time, then the ruchi becomes a sakti. One cannot live even for a moment, or the mind cannot, if the mind even deviates for even a moment from thinking about Krishna, it feels like a fish out of water. It jumps right into the water. So one's attachment to Krishna becomes so great, and the experience becomes so nice. It's not just philosophy or even just pleasure or whatever. It's actually feelings towards Krishna, deep emotional feelings towards Krishna. How wonderful and great Krishna and his devotees are, and one is deeply attached to them, into service to them. So that matures into bhava, where one's relationship with Krishna in one of the five rasas is glimpsed at. One enters into one's spiritual body, and one's spiritual feelings awaken, either generally speaking, as a servant, or as a friend, or as a parent, or as a conjugal lover for Krishna. So that's bhava. But bhava is only one ray in the sunlight of prema. That feelings towards Krishna intensify, so that one is overwhelmed with love for Krishna. And one is overwhelmed by experiencing love that Krishna has for oneself. And similarly, one is able to relish the love that other devotees have for Krishna. One may even relish other devotees' love for Krishna even more than one's own love for Krishna. And similarly, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu realized, Krishna's wonderful qualities, the wonderful qualities of the devotees in prema. And prema is only the beginning of pure love for Krishna. It goes on to sneha, mana, raga, anuraga, bhava, mahabhava. Different rasas have different degrees of intensity of prema. In any case, Bharat Maharaj had achieved the platform of bhava. So we can understand that he was a greatly advanced devotee. He actually had direct experience of Krishna to a certain extent. Krishna, unlimitedly beautiful, unlimitedly wise, unlimitedly strong. He was able to perceive Krishna directly to one extent or another during his sadhana, his meditation. But one day a deer was crossing the river, and one lion shouted very loudly, roared very loudly. And the deer, who was pregnant, became disturbed, jumped into the water out of fear of the lion, and swam across. But due to her exhaustion, and in the middle of the river, she gave birth to a deer cub. And when she reached the other side, due to exhaustion, she died. In the meantime, Bharat Maharaj was watching this incident, and he saw the little deer cub. And the deer cub was helpless. So he picked up the deer cub from the river and he took it home with him. And deer cubs are like, they're cute, they're fluffy, innocent. And so he thought, well, this deer cub is helpless. I would be very hard-hearted if I didn't take care of it. So he started to take care of the deer cub, and it was soft and cuddly, and he started to become attached to it. In the course of time, he became so attached to it that, practically speaking, his devotional service began to dwindle. All he could think of is the deer calf. He'd be in meditation, and the little deer, which is known as a fawn, would come up and nibble at his toes, and he'd just pretend that he was in meditation, but actually he was thinking of the fawn, of the deer. So time went on, he couldn't sleep without the deer on his chest, etc. He gave up a beautiful wife, children, a vast empire, and he fell in love with the deer. So this is called Maya. You didn't know that. That's really Maya. The power of Maya. So after some time, he became obsessed with the deer. And one day the deer didn't come back. And he started to blame himself that maybe the deer had rejected him. I mean, Maya gives us a big imagination. And then he was looking for the deer in the middle of the night, and he fell off a cliff and died. And then the deer calf came. And the last thing he remembered was the deer calf. And the next life he obtained the body of a deer. But because he was a great devotee, therefore he also remembered, Krishna gave him the opportunity to remember his past life as Bharat Maharaj. And he realized, for all my endeavor to become Krishna conscious, I lost it because I fell in love with the deer. This is really not very good. And so he spent his whole life as a deer in the ashram of the devotees, listening to Srimad Bhagavatam, listening to the recitations of Krishna consciousness. And so in his next lifetime, when he gave up the body of a deer, he came back as Jad Bharat. Now, Jad Bharat had figured that I was practically almost on the platform of pure devotional service, prema bhakti, and I lost it all because of attachment for deer. So this material world, he figured, was very, very dangerous. So although he was born in a body, in a family of a pure Brahmin, although pure Brahmin was not a devotee, but a very kind Brahmin, as his father, who tried to teach Jad Bharat the process of purification of becoming a Brahmin. But Jad Bharat had nothing to do with it. He thought that if I act normally, then who knows what's going to happen to me. Maybe my father will force me to get married and I'll get deviated again. And if I come back as a deer again, I may not remember my past life. So he pretended that he was dumb, deaf, and blind, and stupid, so that he could simply remain in meditation and he wouldn't be disturbed. So that went on for some time, but eventually his father died. And when his father died, his brothers, he had 9 brothers, had no conception of who Bharat Maharaj, who Jad Bharat was. They thought he was stupid, dull, blind, and deaf, and therefore they treated him as such, although he was a pure devotee. Now they put him one day on this platform where he was guarding the field against boars and deer who would come to eat the food, the vegetation in the fields. And some dacoits came along and they were looking for a man animal to sacrifice to the goddess Durga, because the goddess Durga they were hoping the goddess Durga would give some benediction to the head of the dacoits so that he would get a son. They caught one, what they considered a man animal, and going to bring him back for the sacrifice. But he escaped. And so they searched everywhere in the dark, and they came upon Jad Bharat and thought this is the perfect man to sacrifice to the goddess Durga. So they took him back to their hideout, and according to their concocted rituals, they bathed him, they clothed him, they decorated him with ornaments, they fed him sumptuously, and then they took a big sword and they were going to sacrifice him before the goddess Durga. But this was intolerable to the goddess Durga, that they were going to sacrifice a pure devotee to her. And so she burst out of the deity, took the sword that they were going to sacrifice Jad Bharat with, and she took it and cut off all their heads. And her associates came and they played with their heads. Ghastly scene. But Jad Bharat was completely undisturbed because he was not living in this material world. His consciousness was absorbed in Krishna consciousness, and therefore he remained undisturbed in spite of the difficulty he was being faced with. He was not disturbed if people treated him nicely or not so nicely, because he was living with Krishna in the spiritual world. Just like it says that Prahladananda Swami was living on a pat of buttermilk every other day, a little bit of buttermilk. But actually his spiritual body was present in the spiritual world, and every day he had 3 big feasts. He was eating 3 big feasts that the gopis had prepared. So he didn't mind externally if he only ate a little pat of buttermilk, a little bit of buttermilk, because he was actually enjoying sumptuous prasadam prepared by the gopis in the spiritual world. So we have that opportunity also. The problem is, we're in the practicing devotional service, and therefore we're trying to fix our minds upon Krishna, and we're learning the process of doing that. How to hear about Krishna, how to think about Krishna, how to understand Krishna, how to accept Krishna. Then, first point is to believe in Krishna. Second is become part of Krishna's family. When we're part of Krishna's family, then we have the same interests Krishna has. And therefore, having the same interests that Krishna has, then we understand that our business is to help others become Krishna conscious, because that's Krishna's interest. He loves everyone. He has everyone's interest at heart, best interest. And therefore, becoming part of Krishna's family means we develop the same vision, the same understanding, and the same sentiments towards others as Krishna has. And that way we become pure devotees of Krishna, where we're always thinking about Krishna. And therefore, the more we're able to purify ourselves by constant association with Krishna, the more we become like Krishna. Just like if you put the iron in the fire, then it becomes hotter and hotter and hotter, and then it takes on all the qualities that the fire has. It may not look like fire, but it acts like fire. So in this purport, Prabhupada points out that there's a process of becoming steady in Krishna consciousness, coming to the liberated platform. And we all have that opportunity. That's what we're here for. And the process is simple. If every day we follow the 5 powerful processes that Srila Prabhupada has given us as a morning program, it is not difficult. It may require some time, and that time requires that we perhaps get up a little earlier than we're accustomed to. But if we get up and we worship the deities, we hear and chant about Krishna and his glories, we chant japa, we hear Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, we serve devotees. We can serve devotees just by hearing them and appreciating them, or other kinds of service we can render to them. And we try to make our lives spiritual. Keep our desks tidy. Try to organize our lives a little bit. And when we get the opportunity, tell others about Krishna. That definitely spiritualizes the atmosphere. So if we follow that, then gradually we become purified. Gradually we become detached from the things that draw our minds away from Krishna. And gradually we can experience Krishna as something pleasurable, rather than just a struggle to get our rounds done. But it actually becomes enjoyable to chant Hare Krishna. It becomes enjoyable to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita. So that's called liberation. So here it says, going back to the verse, Avyabhichari Bhakti means unalloyed devotion. Person engaged in devotional service must be free from material motives. In this Krishna consciousness movement, one's consciousness must be changed. If consciousness is aimed towards material enjoyment, it is material consciousness. If it's aimed towards serving Krishna, it is Krishna consciousness. So in other words, our philosophy is quite simple. Either we're engaged in Krishna consciousness activities and trying to put our minds on Krishna through those devotional activities, or we're engaged in material activities. When we're engaged in Krishna conscious activities, to one extent or another, we're liberated, depending upon how much we're actually concentrating our minds upon Krishna. And when we're engaged in material activities, we're entangled either in the modes of goodness, or in the modes of ignorance, or in the mode of passion, but we're not going anywhere in terms of developing our relation with Krishna, except if we're at least trying to act in goodness, then we're at least treading water in the material existence. We're not sinking, and therefore there's every hope that an expectation that we'll go back to the process of devotional service. Those who are sinking in the modes of material nature, they forget, by the influence of the illusory energy, they forget what we're here for. But when we come to a little goodness and we remember, and then we can become again inclined towards picking up our japa beads and calling out to Srimati Radharani and Krishna lovingly to engage us in their service. So then Prabhupada goes about how Bhakti Yoga is actually the real activity of the soul. And therefore, if we go down to the purport, Prabhupada writes, after this, he said, Krishna's devotee is not subjected to material conditions, even though his bodily features may appear materially conditioned. So we ourselves, we're accustomed to identify ourselves with this body, which we're not. But we don't have to identify ourselves with the body. We can identify ourselves as Krishna's servants. That's specifically why we take initiation, specifically to officially give up our identification with this gross and subtle body, and at least make a conviction that we're going to identify ourselves as the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. That's why we're given a name with Das or Dasi. So therefore, Prabhupada writes, unless one is actually a devotee, he cannot see another devotee perfectly. We're trying to see things properly or accurately. And the process of doing that is to become a devotee of Krishna. And in the process, gradually we'll see things more clearly. In the course of time, as our heart becomes purified, not only will we be able to see Krishna more clearly in our heart and his name, form, quality, and pastime, but outside we'll see things more clearly also. So Prabhupada writes there are three kinds of devotees: Kanishta Adhikari, Madhyama Adhikari, and Uttama Adhikari. And the characteristics have been explained previously, that a Kanishta Adhikari is more or less from a vast range of consciousness, from that of one who's just trying to give up sinful activities to the four Kumaras, who are situated in the pure mode of good, practicing mode of goodness. And Prabhupada explains what the different qualities are. And then Prabhupada goes over, we shouldn't criticize the bodily defects of a devotee. For one thing, is the devotee's not really, his activities are not being impelled, a pure devotee, by the modes of material nature. His activities are inspired by the super soul. He's an instrument for Krishna. Just like we have the example of someone like Vasudeva. Vasudeva was a leopard. His body was covered with sores. And in those sores, the holes of his body, worms were eating his body. So sometimes, but he was absorbed in Krishna consciousness, so he didn't really mind. We can't imitate such devotees. We shouldn't pick up worms and see if those will drill into our body and see how advanced we are. No, he was on that platform, so he didn't mind. Sometimes a worm would fall out of his body, and he'd pick it up and put it back into one of the holes in his body, so the worm could actually live there. Now he had heard, Vasudeva heard that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was visiting nearby, and he ran to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But in the meantime, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had left, and therefore when Vasudeva arrived at that place, he fainted out of separation from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But since Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is all-pervading, he understood that Vasudeva's anxiety to see him, and he came back and appeared on the spot and picked up Vasudeva and embraced him. And when he embraced Vasudeva, his leprosy disappeared. And he got a beautiful golden body, a fulgent body. And he was in ecstasy seeing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he became a little worried that previously I had this horrible body. It smelled horrible. It was infected with worms. But now I have this beautiful body, and perhaps I'll become proud. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave him the advice, just chant Hare Krishna incessantly, and you won't become proud. So externally, he had a horrible body, but internally, he was living in the spiritual world. And then Prabhupada goes over that there are different Goswamis, and sometimes they discriminate between a Western Goswami and an Indian Goswami. But Prabhupada said that this is not proper. If one is actually Goswami, utilizing his senses in the service of Krishna, as explained in the first verse, then he's equal to any other Goswami, because they're both serving Krishna purely. Now, in the last paragraph, Prabhupada points out that if we see like that, we discriminate between externally and think that any devotee is ordinary. Because there are only two energies. There's the spiritual, well, there are more than two energies, but generally speaking, there's the spiritual energy and the material energy. If we're serving the spiritual energy, as Krishna says, Sadatam Kirtiyantomam, Itantas Chadrida Vrataha, Namanyas Tasmam Bhakta Nityuta Upasate. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls worshiping with devotion. So if we're engaged in such activities, that we're under the spiritual energy, and we're acting as instrument for Krishna. Nimitra matram bhavasavasachin. Krishna tells Arjuna, just become an instrument for me. That's our perfection. So even though we may not be perfect completely on the spiritual platform, if we're acting as an instrument for Krishna under the spiritual energy, then we're coming to the perfectional platform. Then we're becoming purified by such activities. So when we see someone, they may not be as exalted, they may not be so exalted from the point of view of steadiness and devotional service, or learned devotee, or may not have all the good qualities. But if they're engaged in devotional service, we should understand to some extent or another, they're actually under the spiritual energy, and we should respect them, as Rupa Goswami says, at least within our minds. If we don't do that, then once we fall down from the spiritual platform ourselves. Or we should try to cooperate with them if they're on a higher level of spiritual advancement. For the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we cooperate with them. And if they're greatly advanced, as we'll go in this last verse, this last paragraph here, which I'm going to read. If they're better than we are, then we should accept that they're more of a transparent via media towards our disciple succession than we are. And we should learn from them how we can become a better devotee ourselves. So then Prabhupada writes in the last paragraph of this particular verse, when one thus criticizes the pure devotee, he commits an offense, Vaishnava aparad, that is very obstructive and dangerous for those who desire to advance in Krishna consciousness. A person cannot derive any spiritual benefit when he offends the lotus feet of a Vaishnava. Everyone should therefore be very careful not to be jealous of an empowered Vaishnava or a Shuddha Vaishnava. It's also an offense to consider empowered Vaishnava an object of disciplinary action. It is offensive to try to give him advice or to correct him. One can distinguish between a neophyte Vaishnava and an advanced Vaishnava by their activities. The advanced Vaishnava is always situated as the spiritual master, and the neophyte is always considered his disciple. The spiritual master must not be subjected to the advice of a disciple, nor should a spiritual master be obliged to take instructions from those who are not his disciples. This is the sum and substance of Srila Rupa Goswami's advice in the 6th verse. In other words, our learning how to become Krishna conscious is quite natural. Although there is some etiquette due to formality. For instance, we have a process of initiation within our society, but the actual reason for initiation is to develop an attitude of discipline, a service attitude. But that service attitude should be extended to all devotees. And that service attitude is developed in the association of Krishna's unalloyed devotees. In other words, for instance, in our society, we accept Srila Prabhupada as the perfect representative of our disciple succession. And as Prabhupada has pointed out, that his books are the law books for us. Therefore, we judge our activities and we judge others' activities in as much as they're actually in line with Srila Prabhupada's instructions, which means the instructions coming down from our entire disciple succession, as well as the examples shown. Srila Prabhupada's examples are as good as those of Dhruva Maharaj or Prahlad Maharaj or the Pandavas or any of our Mahajans. But they're most applicable to our circumstance because we're not in the forest with Dhruva Maharaj. We're not on the lap of a king of the Rakshasas. We haven't been exiled yet into the forest for so many years. But Prabhupada was Representative Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, part of our disciple succession, showing us how we can engage our energies in distributing, serving Krishna, serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by participating in the Sankirtan movement and encouraging others to do the same. Therefore, everyone is advanced and everyone is qualified to act as a guide for others as much as they're a transparent media to Srila Prabhupada, and also perhaps as representatives. I know what Srila Prabhupada once wrote to me. He said, "Thank you very much for this contribution of love. We're all servants of Krishna working under consecutive disciple succession. So please try to understand these books that I've written, and sometime afterwards you'll have to carry on the disciple succession." So that's the same for all of us. As much as we're absorbed in Krishna consciousness by following the process, then to that extent, we become a transparent media for the mercy of Krishna and our acharyas. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he spread this movement to those who are receptive. Philosophically, he explained to them, those who are qualified, what the process of devotional service is and becoming Krishna conscious. But because he was absorbed in Krishna, he's Krishna himself, so obviously he's absorbed in Krishna consciousness. He could perfectly explain, for instance, the Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, the 64 different interpretations of the Atmarama verse in such a way that even a learned scholar like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya could understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And to the animals in the forest, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's from his heart, because he was always absorbed in living in the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. Therefore, when he went into the forest of Jharikanda, he turned the forest into Vaikuntha. So much so that the animals in the forest were dancing and chanting. The tigers were embracing the deer and they were kissing each other. So that's called transcendental potency. Everyone can at least come to the platform of living in Vaikuntha and bringing Vaikuntha wherever we go. Just like Vidura, when he came back from pilgrimage for 32 years, I believe, Maharaj Yudhisthira greeted him with these words: Bhavan vidas bhagavatas tirtha bhutak swayam vibho tirtha koravanti tirtani swantak stena kata britaha. That saints like yourself, they're verily places of pilgrimage because you carry within your heart the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore wherever you go, you turn that place into a place of pilgrimage. The conclusion is, or at least one conclusion could be, that we ourselves become holy places of pilgrimage as much as we're absorbed in Krishna consciousness. And we have to identify by proper training and experience those who are transparent medias better than we are. But we have to judge them on with the background that the Uttama Adhikari, such as Srila Prabhupada, he is our basis of support. That we can only understand how advanced someone is or how accurate someone's instructions are for activities, seeing in comparison to Srila Prabhupada. For that, we have to study Prabhupada's books. We have to practice what Prabhupada has explained to us. We have to serve his representatives, as Prabhupada also wanted us to serve his representatives, but keeping in mind Prabhupada's example and instructions of how to do it. blind following and absurd inquiries are condemned. One should not only hear submissively, but one should get a clear understanding through submission, service, and inquiries. So we're definitely not supposed to be blind followers. If we have authorities, they should be training us to see things properly. And we're not here to absurd inquiries, to talk about nonsense things that have no real basis of our deepening our Krishna consciousness, such as associating with devotees too much who are interested in finding fault. All they can see is that there are so many deficiencies in other devotees, and they think their aim in life is to point them all out. We should assure them that they can relax, that even if they don't point out all the other deficiencies of the devotees, someone else will do it for them. They don't have to think that they're responsible to inform everyone of how fallen everyone is. That will be done nicely by others if they don't do it. But love and appreciation for our acharyas and all the other pure devotees in disciple succession, and love for those who are carrying out or serving those devotees, serving our acharyas in disciple succession, and appreciation for whatever they could do, will help us advance in devotional service and come to the perfection of life. Otherwise, we'll be wasting our time in doing what everyone else is doing in the material world, trying to feel themselves to be better than others, rather than trying to feel oneself to be a servant of others. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Maharaj, you
Oh, wait a
meant
second, Guna, you have to raise your hand because other people are raising their hands. So if you raise your hand, you'll be in queue. Who's raising their hand there? See iPhone NF.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, this is Natasha.
Oh, Natasha.
Yeah, very nice to see you once again, and it's very super nice, and thank you so much. I will, my question will be in English, hopefully it will be translated. So we were taking into consideration the example of Bharat Maharaj and his, let's say, faulty behavior, which was exemplary to us, but at the same time, we also learned that from different kinds of relationships in life, like mother and kids, or between lovers or friends, we can also experience what we like, get a glimpse of what the relationships with Krishna are, for example. So how to like be in the relationship, for example, any kind, and at the same time not get attached too much.
That requires great amount of advancement, but there are different types, there are different degrees of attachment, there are different degrees of advancement. The example that's given is actually, who is that? Was there's one devotee, he was being instructed by, it begins with a P. What's his name? In the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Let me take a look here. English. Srimad Bhagavatam, canto 5. Priyavrata, that's Priyavrata Maharaj. Priyavrata Maharaj was hearing from Narada Muni about how to become a perfect devotee. But his father was Swayambhuva Manu, and Swayambhuva Manu was ruling over the whole universe at that time. But he was a little tired because he was, I think some hundreds of millions of years old, and you get a little tired after that. So he wanted to retire. But there was no one to take his place. The only one there was Priyavrata Maharaj. So he came to Gandhamandana Hill in order to interrupt Narada Muni's instructions to Priyavrata Maharaj. And he realized that this is not going to be easy. Therefore, he brought along with him other Mahajans like Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. The demigods came. And Brahma convinced Narada Muni and convinced Priyavrata Maharaj that Priyavrata Maharaj had to take up ruling the universe. Now, when you rule the universe, you need a wife. Because there are two different, of course, nowadays there are more than two sexes, male and female. They were inventing other ones to come along. But at that time, in a more normal universe, there was only generally two, male and female. So you need a male and you need a female to rule the universe. Otherwise, it's a little imbalanced. So he had a wife, a beautiful wife, and she was assisting Priyavrata Maharaj in ruling the universe, and therefore she had to encourage him. Now, it's not very encouraging for most men if your wife is competing with you, lifting weights in order to stronger than you, etc. So she exhibited feminine qualities, attractive dress, glancing sweetly, etc., etc. So Priyavrata Maharaj was a self-realized soul, but he accepted her service. He didn't say, what are you doing? You're trying to put me in Maya or something? No, he accepted this as his service because women are supposed to be women. They're not supposed to be men. So although he accepted her service, the sweet glances and affectionate dealings, within himself, he always remained a self-realized soul. So that's extremely difficult in this material world. Therefore, come in, one has to judge things accordingly. In other words, we have to do our best we can to remain in Krishna consciousness and at the same time act appropriately externally so that we don't disturb others. And that takes some takes some experience generally. For that reason, our devotional service doesn't always flow so nicely because we're in the process of learning how to do that. So we have to be a little patient and forgiving to ourselves that we're not perfect yet. And therefore we can at least learn, if we can't learn by hearing, at least we can learn by experience. And then if we pray to Krishna, the super soul within our heart, and we seek the counsel and guidance of superior devotees who know how to do these things better than we do, then we can learn in the course of time how to adjust, acting externally, appropriately, and at the same time, keeping Krishna fixed in our heart, devotional service fixed in our heart. So again, we have to be a little patient with ourselves, but also at the same time seek shelter of the appropriate personalities and Shastra, and especially the super soul within our heart, especially the examples given by our acharyas coming through Prabhupada, so that we advance in this way. In that way, our lives will become more absorbed in Krishna consciousness and less distracted by our material associations. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Parthasarthi. Oh, Nirguna, he raised his hand first. Nirguna, do you want to?
But problem, I have two questions, Maharaj. Firstly, it's great to see you after so much time.
I wish
My
I could
question
see
is,
you. I only see Nirguna Das.
yes, the faith. Maharaj, I just wanted, you mentioned two questions. One, you mentioned Vasudev, the leopard. So we hear that, Prahladananda karma can be removed actually by Krishna if Krishna hugged him and removed his leprosy. So we always hear that Prahladananda karma will never be removed.
That's not true. The Prarabdha karma is removed. Karma is the modes of material nature. So if the modes of material nature are removed, that means Prarabdha karma is removed. It's not that by devotional service that the body necessarily changes necessarily, or that we won't die. No, we become detached from the material energy. That's corrupted karma being removed. However, whatever this body is destined to, wherever Krishna desires, it's going to happen. But we won't be affected by it, because we'll be living actually with Krishna. And therefore we won't be affected by our material circumstances. Second question?
Yeah, the second question is, I still don't understand deity worship in Kali Yuga. It says it's not recommended and we still do it. Like that the Kali Yuga, it's chanting of the holy name actually. No, I am saying sometimes it seems that sometimes you are alone with the deities, the temples are empty, and you just wonder
Well,
if there are many people, it's easy, but when you're alone.
well, the temple's not empty if the deities are there.
Yeah.
They're having their pastimes. We're having our pastimes too. So we shouldn't think the temple's empty if the deities are there. The second thing is that deity worship is recommended in every era. It's not that Krishna mercifully appears as a deity and we don't welcome in Kali Yuga. We ask him to go back to some other yuga. No, Krishna is the deity. He is the deity in every yuga. Just like the chanting of the holy name is emphasized in Kali Yuga, but that doesn't mean we don't need prasadam. The process of certainly is chanting the holy name is the principal process, which allows us to appreciate the deity worship, which will allow us eventually to enter into meditation and Krishna consciousness. So our means is principally chanting the holy name, but the deity worship helps us chant the holy name better, purely, because it regulates our habits. And also gives us an opportunity to focus our mind and give our love to Krishna, not only in the form of the holy name, but as the deity. We have so many examples. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also, he worshipped Lord Jagannath. He didn't ask that Lord Jagannath be put out of the temple in Jagannath Puri and the holy names be put in his place. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself worshipped the deities. What to speak of our poor little selves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. And Parthasarthi Prabhu?
Thank you so much, Guru Maharaj. First of all, my apologies that I came late. I was in the Kirtan Mela with Madhava Prabhu in the farm. And it seems like the scriptures sometimes are a bit radical because, as you mentioned, either you do service for Krishna or you are in Maya, you do materialistic activities. However, what happened with those initiated devotees who have to work, and sometimes they don't only deal with the modes of goodness, but also they have to deal with the modes of passion. How can we canalize that to Krishnaize our activities? Yeah.
Well, generally speaking, to begin with, we should give some percentage of our earnings to the service of Krishna, to spread Krishna consciousness. Not everything, because the life of devotee is also service to Krishna. One's home, one's family, everything is actually service to Krishna. But some percentage should be given to spreading. Then we'll take Krishna's consciousness more seriously, even at our job. Now, if you look at Prahlad Maharaj, he didn't have the easiest job, although he was chanting Hare Krishna. He was harassed by his father in so many different ways. Still, he remained fixed in Krishna consciousness. It takes practice. We shouldn't think that when I have a job, this is the place where I'm supposed to be in Maya. No, we can be in Krishna conscious anywhere. Krishna is everywhere. There's no place where it says Krishna is not allowed here. We just have to practice in such a way as to be aware of him in any circumstance, but that may take some time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Nectar of Instruction Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Lord
Jai.
Premanande.
Hari Hari Bol.
Is calling the Prahladananda Swami Maharaj ki.
Jai.
Jai.